It's a collaboration between two heavy metal legends that would surely break the internet. Former Metallica guitarist Dave Mustaine.
In 1992, Jason Newsted walked into a studio in Los Angeles, expecting a collaborative session with Dave Mustaine to discuss a potential bass technique instructional video for MTV. Instead, what transpired would lead to a decades-long silence between two of metal's most respected musicians. From heated arguments about production techniques to accusations of betrayal that would echo through the industry for years, this is the untold story of why Jason Newsted refused to work with Dave Mustaine for over 30 years, and the shocking statements he's finally ready to make public. Jason Newsted was born on March 4, 1963, in Battle Creek, Michigan. Growing up in rural Michigan, Newsted found his passion for music early, picking up the bass at age 14 after being inspired by Gene Simmons of Kiss and Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath. By his late teens, Newsted had developed a distinctive, aggressive playing style that would eventually catch the attention of the thrash metal scene. While his early musical journey included stints in bands like Gangster and Flotsam and Jetsam, Newsted's life changed dramatically in 1986, when he was chosen from among more than 50 bassists to replace the late Cliff Burton in Metallica. This opportunity thrust him into the spotlight as he joined one of metal's fastest-rising bands, just as they were ascending to mainstream success. Newsted's work ethic was legendary even in those early days. Band members often commented that he was always the first to arrive at rehearsals and the last to leave, constantly working to perfect his technique and earn his place in the shadow of the beloved Burton. This dedication would become a defining characteristic of Newsted's career, earning him respect throughout the industry even as it sometimes created tension with bandmates who didn't share his intensity. Dave Mustaine's story, of course, had its own dramatic trajectory. After his infamous dismissal from Metallica in 1983, Mustaine formed Megadeth with a clear mission: to play music that was faster, more technical, and more aggressive than his former band. Through the late 1980s, both Megadeth and Metallica rose to prominence, though their relationship remained notoriously strained. By 1992, both bands had achieved significant commercial success. Metallica's self-titled Black Album had catapulted them to unprecedented mainstream popularity, while Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction was poised to become their commercial breakthrough. It was during this period that paths crossed in unexpected ways behind the scenes. In spring of 1992, MTV was expanding its music education content, developing a series of instructional videos featuring prominent musicians. The concept was simple: pair musicians known for similar styles but from different bands to create engaging content for aspiring players. The pairing of Newsted and Mustaine seemed natural to executives. Both were known for their technical proficiency and came from thrash metal's Big Four. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a small production studio in Los Angeles where preliminary filming would take place. According to those present, Newsted arrived an hour early, characteristic of his professional approach. He spent time chatting with the production crew, setting up his equipment, and preparing notes on techniques he wanted to demonstrate. Mustaine arrived 45 minutes late. Witnesses recall that while not visibly intoxicated, he appeared agitated and immediately began making comments about the studio setup, criticizing everything from the lighting to the amplifiers provided. When introduced to Newsted, multiple sources confirmed that Mustaine's first words were, "So they sent the replacement instead of the real thing." This apparent reference to Newsted's status as Burton's replacement in Metallica created immediate tension. According to a production assistant who was present, Newsted initially attempted to defuse the situation, responding with something to the effect of, "I'm just here to talk about bass playing, man. Let's keep it professional." What followed was described by witnesses as an increasingly uncomfortable exchange about musical technique. While discussing Newsted's approach to bass playing, Mustaine reportedly interrupted repeatedly to compare Newsted's technique unfavorably to Burton's, making comments like, "That's not how a real bassist would approach it," and "No wonder they keep your bass buried in the mix." This last comment touched on a particularly sensitive subject for Newsted, who had famously struggled with the production on Metallica's and Justice for All album, where his bass lines were notoriously difficult to hear in the final mix. According to studio personnel, Newsted's demeanor changed noticeably after this remark. The situation escalated when discussion turned to the instructional content they would create together. Mustaine insisted that the focus should be primarily on how bass players should complement lead guitar, a perspective that Newsted, who had strong views about the bass as a foundational instrument with its own voice, found fundamentally disrespectful to his instrument. According to multiple accounts, the breaking point came when Mustaine picked up Newsted's personal Warmoth bass, a custom instrument with significant sentimental value that Newsted had used on several Metallica recordings, without asking permission. When Newsted objected, Mustaine allegedly responded by suggesting the bass finally might be played properly. What happened next has become something of legend in metal circles. Newsted, typically known for his professional demeanor, reportedly took his bass back, packed it carefully in its case, and told Mustaine and the production team, "You can make instructional videos about respecting other musicians first. I'm done here." The MTV project was immediately canceled, costing the network an estimated $75,000 in pre-production expenses. More significantly, it created a rift between two influential musicians that would remain unaddressed for decades. In the aftermath, both musicians returned to their respective bands without public comment on the incident. The production team was reportedly asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, explaining the lack of contemporaneous reporting about the confrontation. However, rumors circulated throughout the industry, with fragments of the story emerging in various musician circles. The professional consequences were subtle but significant. In subsequent years, Newsted and Mustaine notably avoided events where both might be present. At festivals where both Metallica and Megadeth performed, scheduling ensured they were never on site simultaneously. Award ceremonies often featured one or the other, but rarely both, leading to speculation about behind-the-scenes arrangements to keep them separated. Throughout the 1990s, Newsted maintained a diplomatic silence when asked about Mustaine in interviews, typically redirecting questions or offering generic comments about respecting all musicians. Mustaine, more outspoken by nature, occasionally made veiled references to certain bassists who can't handle criticism, though he never mentioned Newsted by name. This professional frost continued even as both musicians' careers evolved. Newsted departed from Metallica in 2001, citing private and personal reasons and physical damage as his official explanation. He later elaborated that creative differences and treatment within the band contributed to his decision. After leaving Metallica, he formed Echo Brain and later joined Voivod, continuously exploring new musical directions. Mustaine, meanwhile, continued to lead Megadeth through multiple lineup changes and stylistic evolutions. His public feuds, particularly with Metallica's James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, often overshadowed any tensions with Newsted, perhaps explaining why the bass player conflict received less attention. The music industry changed dramatically in the 2000s, with the rise of social media creating new platforms for musicians to connect with fans and, potentially, reignite old conflicts. Yet the silence between Newsted and Mustaine persisted, notable in an era when many long-standing metal feuds were publicly addressed or resolved. The first sign of change came in 2011 with the Big Four concerts, which featured Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth performing together for the first time. Though Newsted was no longer with Metallica, he made special guest appearances at some shows. Observers noted that while Mustaine and Newsted were photographed in group settings, they were never seen directly interacting. In music circles, stories about the 1992 incident continued to circulate, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some versions claimed physical altercations had occurred. Others suggested that legal action had been threatened. The reality, known only to those present, remained private while speculation flourished. Fast forward to 2023. Newsted, now 60 and largely focused on his visual art and occasional musical projects, agreed to an in-depth interview with a prominent metal magazine to discuss his career retrospective. It was during this conversation that he finally addressed the long-rumored conflict with Mustaine. The interview, published last month, contains Newsted's first public comments on the incident. While measured in his language, Newsted didn't hold back on the impact of that day. "What happened in that studio in '92 wasn't just about two musicians disagreeing," Newsted stated. It was about fundamental respect for another person, for their instrument, for their journey. When someone takes jabs at you replacing a legend like Cliff, they're not just insulting you, they're disrespecting Cliff's memory by using it as a weapon. When asked why he had maintained silence for so long, Newsted's response was characteristically thoughtful. "I've always believed that how you conduct yourself off stage says more about you as a musician than what you play on stage. Would it have benefited anyone for me to go public with this 30 years ago? It would have just been another Metal Feud headline. That doesn't help music move forward." Regarding the specifics of what transpired, Newsted confirmed the core details while dispelling some of the more extreme rumors. "No, I didn't punch anyone," he said with a laugh. "I just removed myself from a situation that wasn't productive. When someone disrespects your instrument, literally and figuratively, there's no foundation for collaboration." Perhaps most revealing were Newsted's comments about the aftermath. "For years, I would hear through mutual friends or crew members that Dave had made comments about my playing or my contribution to Metallica. It always struck me as strange to put that energy into criticizing another musician instead of focusing on your own art." The interview took an unexpected turn when Newsted was asked if he would be open to working with Mustaine today. His response has generated significant buzz throughout the metal community. "At this point in my life, I've made peace with a lot of things. But there are certain bridges that once burned should stay that way. It's not about holding grudges. It's about recognizing when two approaches to music and musicianship are fundamentally incompatible. Dave has his legacy, I have mine, and they don't need to intersect." He continued, more pointedly, "When I look at the musicians Dave has worked with over the years, the revolving door of talented people who somehow couldn't make it work with him, I realize that what happened between us wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that has defined his career as much as his undeniable musical contributions." When pressed about whether he thought Mustaine had changed over the decades, Newsted's response was measured but firm. "People can absolutely change and grow. I hope Dave has found whatever peace he's been looking for. But some fundamental aspects of how we approach collaboration seem pretty consistent based on what I've observed from a distance. I wish him well, but from that distance." The interviewer noted that Newsted became more animated when discussing how the incident affected his approach to mentoring younger musicians. "If anything positive came from that day, it's that it crystallized for me how I never wanted to treat another musician. When younger players approach me now, I'm almost obsessively respectful of their journey, their instruments, their perspective. Every musician deserves that basic dignity, whether they've been playing for 30 days or 30 years. Mustaine has yet to publicly respond to Newsted's comments, though sources close to Megadeth indicate he was surprised and disappointed by the characterization of events. His representatives declined formal comment when contacted by several publications. The timing of Newsted's revelations has sparked particular interest as both musicians enter the later stages of their careers. At 60 and 62 respectively, Newsted and Mustaine represent a generation of metal pioneers whose interpersonal conflicts have become almost as much a part of the genre's history as their musical innovations. For many in the metal community, Newsted's comments provide context for what has long been perceived as a strange gap in the genre's interconnected history. While various combinations of members from thrash's defining bands have collaborated over the years, the absence of any Newsted-Mustaine project had been notable, but unexplained. Music historians have pointed out that the 1992 incident, while seemingly minor compared to some of metal's more dramatic feuds, actually represented a significant fork in the road for both musicians' careers. The instructional video, had it proceeded, would have positioned both as educators and elder statesmen of the genre, potentially opening doors to collaborative projects that never materialized. Industry veterans who have worked with both musicians over the years have offered varied perspectives on Newsted's revelations. A former Megadeth manager, speaking on condition of anonymity, suggested that Dave has always respected Jason's playing more than people realize. His comments that day came from a complicated place. Part rivalry with Metallica, part genuine frustration with his own career trajectory at that time. Meanwhile, a sound engineer who worked on several Metallica projects noted that Jason never brought that incident into the studio. He wasn't the type to let personal conflicts affect his professionalism, but you could tell certain subjects were off limits in conversation, and Mustaine was definitely one of them. For fans, Newsted's comments have reopened discussion about the complicated interpersonal dynamics that shaped thrash metal's development. Online forums and social media have been flooded with debates about whether the genre might have evolved differently had its key players maintained better relationships. Some have suggested that a Newsted-Mustaine collaboration could have created a fascinating hybrid of their distinctive approaches. As both musicians continue their respective journeys, Mustaine still leading Megadeth despite health challenges including a bout with throat cancer, Newsted focused on visual art and selective musical projects. The revelation of their long-simmering conflict feels like the closing of a chapter in metal history. Music journalists have noted that Newsted's willingness to finally address the incident publicly may reflect a broader trend of aging musicians taking stock of their legacies and resolving unfinished business. As the pioneers of thrash metal move into their 60s and beyond, many seem increasingly concerned with setting the record straight on pivotal moments in their careers. In his concluding remarks in the interview, Newsted offered what many have interpreted as his final word on the matter. Metal has always been about intensity and conflict. That's part of its power. But there's a difference between the aggression we channel into our music and how we treat each other as human beings. I'd like to think that after all these years, we've learned to separate the two. Whether this public acknowledgement might eventually lead to some form of reconciliation remains to be seen. Given the decades of silence that preceded Newsted's comments and the finality of his tone, most industry observers consider it unlikely. Some things in the world of metal, it seems, remain unresolved by design, their very incompleteness a testament to the powerful personalities that shape the genre's history. For Jason Newsted and Dave Mustaine, two musicians whose paths diverged dramatically after that tense day in a Los Angeles studio, perhaps the most honest collaboration is the one that never happened. A moment of conflict that, in its own way, helped define who each would become in the decades that followed.